All right, buckle up, everyone, for a deep dive into the 1994 BMW M3. We're talking about a car that really set the bar for performance. And luckily for us, we've got some original brochures here. They give us a glimpse into how BMW wanted the world to see this machine.
Yeah, these brochures are like time capsules, you know?
Mhm.
They really capture that feeling of what it was like to be a car enthusiast back in '94.
So let's jump right in. Right off the bat, the brochure proudly proclaims that the M3 was named Car of the Year by Automobile Magazine. They called it thrilling yet sensible, luxurious and fun to drive.
Oh yeah, that's a pretty bold statement.
It is. So how did the M3 live up to all that hype?
Well, it definitely wasn't all just marketing fluff. This was a time when Japanese sports cars were really making a name for themselves, and BMW had to come out swinging.
So they were aiming to go head-to-head with cars like the Supra and the 300ZX.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's talk specs. The brochure boasts a 3.0 Earl engine, 240 horsepower, and a 0 to 60 time of 6.1 seconds.
Not too shabby even by today's standards.
Right. But what did those numbers mean back in '94?
Well, those were pretty impressive figures back then, especially for a European car. Yeah. It put the M3 right up there with the best of the Japanese competition.
But it sounds like BMW was going for more than just raw power. I see here they talk about something called responsive power.
Ah, yes. That was a
Yeah.
key part of the M3's appeal. It wasn't just about having a high horsepower number. It was about how that power was delivered.
So how do they achieve that responsive power?
Well, it came down to a combination of factors. Things like their innovative digital motor electronics system, which precisely managed fuel injection and ignition timing. But essentially, it meant that the engine's power delivery was smooth and consistent across the entire RPM range.
So you wouldn't just get this sudden burst of acceleration that quickly fades. It was more of a sustained surge of power that made the car feel more controllable and engaging to drive.
Exactly.
And speaking of engaging to drive, let's talk about the M3's design. The brochure highlights all the aerodynamic elements, like those sculpted sides, the spoilers, even the placement of the air vents.
Right? They really emphasized how every detail was designed with performance in mind.
But was it all form following function, or was there some marketing fluff mixed in there?
Well, BMW was obsessed with this idea of peak performance
Mhm.
in every aspect of the car. They believed that a well-designed car should not only look good, but also perform exceptionally well.
And that meant paying attention to every little aerodynamic detail.
Absolutely. Even those sculpted sides weren't just for show. They actually helped reduce drag and improve stability at high speeds.
So it really did all contribute to a better driving experience.
It did.
Okay, so we've talked about power and aerodynamics, but let's not forget about luxury. The brochure shows off those M-design sport seats, the available leather upholstery, and that driver-focused cockpit design. So how did this level of luxury stack up against other sports cars of the era?
That's a good question. You see, back then, some sports cars were pretty bare bones. They focused purely on performance with very few creature comforts.
So they were basically stripped-down track machines.
Yeah, pretty much.
But the M3 seems like it was aiming for something different.
It was. BMW wanted to create a sports car that you could comfortably drive every day without sacrificing any of that performance potential.
So it was trying to bridge the gap between a hardcore track weapon and a comfortable daily driver.
You got it.
Interesting. Now, the brochure also dedicates a whole section to safety. They talk about features like ABS brakes, a rigid body structure, and even a theft deterrent system. Were these considered standard features in the 90s, or was the M3 ahead of the curve?
Well, some of these features were starting to become more common, but BMW really took safety seriously and integrated it into the M3's overall performance philosophy.
Right, like ABS wasn't just about preventing wheel lockup. It was about giving the driver more control during hard braking,
Precisely.
which could be crucial in a performance driving situation.
Exactly.
And that rigid body structure wasn't just about crash safety. It also contributed to the car's handling by providing a solid foundation for the suspension.
Right. It all ties together.
So it seems like BMW was really trying to create this holistic package with the 1994 M3. They combined performance, luxury, and safety into one very compelling machine.
Yeah, they really did aim to create a car that could do it all.
But did it actually live up to the hype? Did the driving experience match all those lofty claims made in the brochures?
Well, that's what we're going to find out. In the next part, we'll dive into what the critics had to say about the M3 and see if it truly earned that Car of the Year title.
Sounds good. I'm definitely eager to hear more. All right, so we've seen what BMW was aiming for with this M3, but marketing is one thing, you know. What did the real-world experience actually feel like?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
It is. So how did the M3 actually stack up against the competition?
Well, thankfully, we've got some peer reviews to give us a sense of how it was perceived back in the day.
Oh, perfect. So what were people saying?
Well, Car and Driver magazine, for example, they did a comparison test.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, they pitted the M3 against some of its toughest rivals, the Lexus SC300, the Nissan 300 ZX2 Plus 2, and the Toyota Supra.
So the heavy hitters of the time.
Yeah, exactly, the
Now,
cream of the crop.
how did the M3 do?
Well, let's just say it came out on top.
No surprise there.
Nope. Car and Driver declared it their runaway winner for 1994. They praised its scintillating speed, brilliant handling, and utilitarian package. They were really impressed by how the M3 managed to combine performance and practicality without really compromising on either.
Yeah, that seems to be a recurring theme with this car.
It is.
So beyond just winning comparison tests, what was it about the M3 that made it such a joy to drive?
Well, remember that responsive power we talked about earlier?
Yeah.
That really came through in the driving experience. Reviewers consistently raved about the engine's smooth and linear power delivery. It just made the car feel so eager and responsive at any speed.
And I imagine that contrasted quite a bit with some of its turbocharged competitors.
Yeah, exactly. Some of those cars might have had higher peak horsepower numbers,
Yeah.
but the where they delivered that power could be a bit more well unrefined.
Right, more of a sudden kick in the pants.
Yeah, exactly.
Whereas the M3 was more about this constant buildup of power.
Right. It was more like a wave than a punch.
I like that analogy. And I bet those aerodynamic elements we talked about also played a role in the driving experience.
Oh, absolutely. They weren't just for show.
So they really made a difference out on the road.
They did.
Now, what about the suspension? Did it live up to that promise of being both sporty and comfortable?
Well, that's where BMW's engineering expertise really shone through. They managed to tune the suspension to provide both sharp handling and a surprisingly compliant ride.
How'd they pull that off?
Well, they used a combination of stiffer springs and gas-pressurized shock absorbers. Those are designed to react more quickly to bumps and dips in the road.
So it wasn't like those old school sports cars that beat you up over every bump?
Not at all. This was a car you could actually enjoy driving on a daily basis.
Interesting. So the M3 wasn't just a weekend toy. It was a car you could live with day in and day out.
Exactly.
That's pretty impressive.
It is. And speaking of impressive, the M3 was also ahead of the curve when it came to safety features.
Right. We talked about those standard features like ABS and that rigid body structure, but
Sure.
the brochure also mentions something called electronic damper control,
Ah, yes.
EDC.
What was that all about?
Well, it was a pretty cutting-edge feature for its time. It allowed the driver to adjust the stiffness of the suspension on the fly.
Oh, wow. So you could literally tailor the handling to your liking.
Yep, you could have a softer setting for cruising on the highway, and then firm things up when you wanted to attack some twisty back roads.
That's pretty cool. It gave the driver a lot of control.
It did.
So all in all, it sounds like the M3 lived up to the hype.
It did.
It was a true driver's car.
It was.
But what about the interior? Did it live up to that promise of luxury and driver focus?
That's a great question, and one we'll tackle right after this.
All right, so we talked about how this M3 performed out on the road. But what about the experience inside the car? Did the interior live up to that promise of luxury and driver focus? Oh yeah. Stepping into the M3's cabin was like entering a whole different world, especially compared to some of its more Spartan rivals.
Right, like those M-Design sport seats that the brochure keeps highlighting.
Those seats were something else. They weren't just stylish. They were designed to provide both comfort and support during spirited driving.
Yeah, and I see they were available in a variety of materials. Leather was obviously an option, but even the standard cloth upholstery looks pretty high-end for the time.
They definitely didn't skimp on the materials. And remember, this was before the days of those heavily bolstered sport seats that practically hug you.
Right.
The M3's seat struck a nice balance between support and everyday comfort.
So you could take it to the track and then commute in it without feeling like you'd been through the ringer.
Exactly.
Now looking at the dashboard here, it's got those clear, easy-to-read gauges and controls. Everything seems to be within easy reach of the driver.
It's all about minimizing distractions and maximizing that connection between the driver and the car.
And I noticed that the center console angles slightly towards the driver.
Right. Along with that low seating position, it creates this sense of being enveloped by the car, almost like you're wearing it.
Interesting. And it looks like they offered a few different interior trim options as well, including that very stylish wood trim.
Yeah. It's interesting how they managed to incorporate those luxurious touches without making the cabin feel too fussy or cluttered.
Right, it still feels sporty and purposeful.
Exactly.
Now, speaking of sporty and purposeful, We haven't talked much about that BMW M ownership as a lifestyle concept that the brochure mentions. What was that all about?
Well, it was definitely more than just marketing. BMW was really trying to cultivate a sense of community among M3 owners.
So it was about more than just the car itself.
It was. They offered exclusive events, driving schools, even special merchandise.
So it was like joining a club.
Yeah, exactly. A tribe of like-minded enthusiasts who shared a passion for performance driving.
Hmm. I bet those owners became like ambassadors for the brand, almost like walking, talking advertisements for the M3 lifestyle.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
And it was a pretty innovative strategy at the time.
So they were really ahead of the curve.
They were.
I think we've covered a lot of ground here, from the technical specs to the marketing hype to the actual driving experience.
Yeah, we've really gotten a good sense of what this car was all about.
So what stands out to you the most about the M3?
Hmm. I think is how BMW managed to blend all these seemingly disparate elements. Performance and practicality, luxury and sportiness, raw driving thrills, and everyday usability.
It really was a complete package.
It was. And that's what made it so appealing to such a wide range of buyers.
Well said. Well, folks, I hope this deep dive has given you a better appreciation for what made the 1994 BMW M3 such a legend. It was a car that truly captured the spirit of its time and set a benchmark for performance and driving pleasure that we're still talking about today. Thanks for joining us.